Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another edition of the Oliver Scholars CEO Salon series. My name is Dr. Danielle Moss, and it gives me great pride and privilege to be hosting today's conversation about bridging the gap. I am more than excited about the three discussants we have joining us today. They are experts in the field of diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racist activism. So let me just start introducing you to this illustrious panel, and I'm excited about the conversation that we're about to have. So my first discussant is Monica Dennis. She is the co-director of the Move to End Violence. She's a Black feminist and lifelong advocate for racial and gender equality. She also was one of the organizers of Black Lives Matter Ride to Ferguson. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Monica Dennis. Hey, Monica.
Good evening. Thank you for having
me. Our next discussant is Benny Vasquez. Benny is the Chief Equity Officer for KIPP Schools. He is well known to many of Oliver Scholars' partner schools as an anti-racist activist. He also identifies as a parent and an Afro-Latinx Black queer intersectional activist. And I am so delighted to have Benny joining this conversation. Hey, Benny.
Hey, hello. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for agreeing to do this. Yeah. And last but certainly not least is attorney Paula Edgar. She is a partner of Inclusion Strategy Solutions, a consulting firm that provides innovative and strategic solutions on organizational diversity efforts, intercultural fluency initiatives, sexual harassment prevention, and EEO compliance. And we're delighted to have Paula joining the conversation as well.
Hi.
Hi. So I want to get started with this question. It may seem somewhat basic, but a lot of folks are now talking about, anti-racism. I'm an anti-racist activist. I'm an anti-racist consultant. Can you tell us, and I'd love to hear each of you kind of take a stab at this, what is an anti-racist activist and what does that look like? What does it mean to be an anti-racist organization or school? Who wants to get started? Any volunteers? Okay, Paula.
Sure. An anti-racist organization is one that doesn't center whiteness, that it understands the racist inception of its being, and works to undo that. So that may be through training, that may be through policy review, that might be through their hiring practices. Essentially, it is the act of not centering whiteness, which is something that we have done as a country for a very long time. So it's the opposite of that, and it's always action oriented. So it never stops. You don't get to I am an anti-racist. You got to keep the work going.
You don't get a gold star.
No, not at all. Not a white one either.
Yeah. Benny?
Yes, I stamp everything Paula says. I think it's really around an organization that is very reflective in terms of its policies and practices and behaviors to ensure that it is not reinforcing white supremacy, right? It is an organization that says, I'm going to do this even though it's really, really hard. I'm going to do this with accountability, with rigor, with love, and with transformation in order for us to have create an organization that's for the people, right? And I think you just don't stop. It's an organization that does not stop doing the work. You do it even when you don't want to do it anymore, particularly for the white people. Even when they don't want to do it anymore, do it again.
Great. Monica?
Just check to everything that's been shared. The other thing I would add is that an anti-racist education or community is trauma-informed and healing-centered, right? So it's actually taking into account the current trauma that the community may be experiencing, as well as the historical and multi-generational trauma. And I want to say not just for the students, but for the faculty, the administration, the people who are working in the facilities team, right? Sometimes when we think about an anti-racist community at a school, we're always focusing on the students, but it's the families, it's the staff, the administration, and the community often that these schools are connected to.
Great. I heard someone use the term white supremacy. Does anybody want to volunteer to just unpack that a little bit? Because I think for some folks, it's like, I don't belong to the Klan, so I'm not part of white supremacy, and I think it's a little deeper than that. So somebody raise their hand.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah,
Monica,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead,
So
Monica.
exactly that, right? In the United States in particular, we are attached to an iconography that we conflate with white supremacists or white supremacy. So you named it the Klan or Nazis or neo-Nazis, right? But white supremacy is about what are the powers, the structures, the institutions, the practices that allow for white people to maintain power and control and access to resources. And that's done at the expense of folks of color. So I'll say that again, really. White supremacy is about maintaining white power, dominance, control, and access to resources and opportunities, even when those folks are not even when white people are not in the majority, right? And so you can be in a school community that can have quite a few people of color on staff, but when you look at the outcomes for career trajectory for staff, as well as what is happening to students and families, right? Like, why are white people over and over actually meeting the markers of success, right? And so it's also the way the markers of success are set up.
Mm-hmm. So, I think when people first started to talk about DEI in a lot of circles, it was kind of like white people over here and this broad kind of category of POC, people of color on the other side of the fence. And now I'm hearing more and more folks kind of acknowledge and talk about anti-Black racism. As someone whose family hails from the Caribbean, even that history resonates with me in terms of like how my family stacked up in terms of like social status based on complexion. But does anybody want to talk about like, why talk about anti-racism when you can talk about people of color?
Well, I think the reason why we have to talk about anti-Black racism, to your point, is how this country and all the other places that on the triangle trade were set up based on the labor of enslaved Black people, enslaved Africans, and losing that from the conversation about racism really is losing a huge piece of what has formed who we are, what we know as our power structures, and what we have built everything on, right? So it resonated for me when you said just now, from the Caribbean, and in terms of, sort of looking at colorism, et cetera, because my family's also from Barbados, and I remember my grandmother saying to me, "Thank goodness you're not that dark," right? Mm-hmm. So there, and then thinking about how I have had friends who'd say to me, "You're not Black like those people." Right. So there's a lot of different systems that we navigate in that are specifically against Black people, that are specifically about being holding Black as the ultimate evil, and everything else being this good thing to snap against you. And so we're changing that narrative is focusing on being anti-Black racist as opposed to just anti-racist. Everybody should be anti-racist, right? Yeah, we agree with that. But there's a reason for us to be focused on this. And particularly now, I think George Floyd, there hasn't been a day since George Floyd has died since I haven't said his name, and someone hasn't said his name to me, right? It created a catalyst in which people were able to see and have this sort of awakening. And I would say other people, because we were all, we knew this already. But there are people who are like, wow, because of that, now I understand how bad it is. And it was because of the nature in which his death happened, right? He was not resisting. He was being murdered for 8 minutes and 46 seconds on a screen for us all to see. When you put that against Eric Garner's death, people will say, well, he was resisting. He was, there was a difference in terms of how this was that made people now think, gosh, Black people really have it bad. And now there's this reflection on the whole experience of being Black, both in this country and prior to that, and what it has meant for us as Black people. So, yeah.
Thank you.
And I think anti-Black racism is so prevalent in our schools, right? And we talk about independent schools. I mean, independent schools weren't created for us, like they were not, right? And so it's founded in anti-Blackness. And not only anti-Blackness that white people perpetuate, but anti-Blackness that people of color perpetuate against Black people.
Yeah.
And you see it in the curriculum and in the staffing and who cooks versus who's the head, right? Like all of that.
I would add that when we don't address anti-Black racism straight out, we actually miss us an actual opportunity to look at solutions, right? So as Black folks, I actually know what's needed, right? My family knew what was needed when I was at an independent school, and that was true for all my peers and folks that were working on staff. And so when we have like a colorblind approach and don't actually look specifically at what is happening to Black people within the school community, we miss opportunities for solutions, for new ways forward, for different ways for leadership to show up, right? And then the school is actually not as strong and as successful and as high ranking as it thinks it is.
You know, when someone asks me, you know, should organizations like Oliver continue to encourage families of color to consider the independent school experience, you know, I said there is a mutual benefit to this access, right? You cannot be a world-class institution in an all-white organization because the majority of the world doesn't look like that. And so, you know, we also know that there are cognitive and other kinds of positive outcomes for white students who attend integrated schools. So there's definitely some mutual benefit when our kids and us, right, have had access to some of these institutions.
Right, and not just sports.
And not just
Okay, not just sports, because I was not anybody's athlete. Let me just. No, that wasn't my contribution.
either.
Sorry. So another term that I'm hearing kind of like bantered around a lot is white organizational culture. But I think it's so important for white organizations and all organizations actually to unpack what that means in terms of, someone said it earlier, who sets the bar? You know, who defines the canon in the academy? Who decides what knowledge is? Who decides what good enough is? I remember having a conversation with a nonprofit executive who is not a person of color, you know, talking about, you know, I have these 2 staff shiny apples, and, you know, this African-American male staff member is so good with the families. The kids are connected to him. You know, he has great relationships. He can motivate the kids to do things that other people in the organization can't do. But his white colleague was perceived as being higher performing because, you know, her Excel spreadsheets were the bomb. And, you know, she dabbled in data, and data is important. And I don't want to go down the data rabbit hole. But yeah, so how do we come to understand the ways in which white organizational culture has shaped like the very foundation of all of our organizations? Jump in. Penny?
Oof. I think for me, white organizational culture exists everywhere, right? It even exists in organizations that are predominantly of color, like that's for sure. But it's because it's what we've been raised to know what's right, right? And so some of the reckoning needs to happen around. So when we talk about white supremacy culture, when we talk about urgency, right? For example, which is always thrown around. If I have to catch a plane, I'm gonna be urgent to catch that plane, right? I'm saying, but like, there's a way that if we look at all the factors of white supremacy culture and the way that they interact with each other, that actually it re-enhances white supremacy.
Yeah. I would add, I'm so grateful for the work of Tema Okun and Dr. Kenneth Jones for putting that work out almost 25, 30 years ago around like actually naming what we would define as professionalism, right? And what it means to be professional in the workplace. And when I think about what gets, and then that definition of professional is what's dominant. It does not allow for other forms of expression or other ways of being, other styles of leadership. And when I think about some of the ways I see schools getting into, actually reinforcing dominant culture. Like one is what I think about is universalism, right? And so what is good for white students must be good and acceptable for all students, right? And never actually thinking about like, what is it that's unique and what are the special things, not special and specific things that are actually needed for families to be able to thrive. But then the myth of universalism, right? So like somehow what's good for white families is good for all families. And however, when white families need something specific, then they get into their uniqueness. Like my child needs this and I must advocate for that, right? So that piece there. I think another one of the habits is like exceptionalism versus mediocre, right? And so for Black students, Native students, students of color who are going to these schools, they're already, the setup is you must be exceptional to get into independent schools, whereas that's not the case for a lot of white families and a lot of white faculty, right? Like you're actually talking about mediocrity or just like being average, but the setup is already that for us to even select you, you must be exceptional. And we're not going to compare you against other white students who may not be up to your bar, but we're actually going to look at you against other students of color. So this false sense of competition, that there's only a small number of opportunities for POC families. And then because of anti-Black racism, there's going to be a pecking order, right? And so schools are following the myth of the model minority, right? Where the assumption is that Asian students are more effective, more likely to be successful in the schools, whereas the darker, the browner you are, the more likely you are to be hostile, to be resistant, to use Paula's language, to be not able, you don't actually fit here, right? And so all of the massaging and compartmentalizing that is required of families of color in general. And then I'm gonna say like for Black families and specifically are some of the ways that white supremacy culture shows up in the school communities.
This feels like therapy. So that exceptionalism piece really sort of rings true. And in thinking about even some of the pipelines that we have to go through in order to get access to the spaces, they say you can be regular to get to those spaces, right? So it's not just the institutions, it's also some of the ways to getting there, right? But to maintain, when you said the piece about pitting Black people against each other, I immediately thought about the sort of tiers of, folks who are from, different countries in Africa and the Caribbean, and then Black Americans, and how that dichotomy was sort of shifted. But I mean, for my entire life, it's been, well, you are West Indian, so you're going to do X thing, and and that all kind of perpetuates itself, because then people start to say, oh yes, that's what I'm supposed to do, and also that is what is being put upon me. When you mention professionalism, and you think about the literal lines that are put around how we can and present ourselves and be successful, it says conform or you're not going to thrive, or you're not going to survive, right? And when I go into organizations and talk about how to really look through a lens of equity, right? It's let's pick two people who you feel are similarly situated but are a different race. Let's talk about how they've gotten to that space. What has been their experience? How have they been assessed? How have they elevated or not within the space? And how can we look at the frameworks in which we define success in your organization? And are they bona fide occupational qualifications, or are they what you're saying looks like what is supposed to be success, which is often through that white lens? So, yeah.
The last thing I want to add is like, sorry, Benny, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Is policing, right? So we're in this national dialogue about policing, and we have to be honest about the ways that students, families, parents, faculty, deans, so administrators of color are being policed. Everything from how you word an email to how you dress, what your body looks like, what kind of hair is acceptable, right? And creating an environment that is painful and traumatizing. It's not about discomfort, but it's painful and traumatizing, and all of this in order to keep white administrators and white families comfortable. So this other piece about like a right to comfort, who needs to be comfortable, and who you are actually makes me uncomfortable. So can you modify, please?
I think what I was going to add was the myth of meritocracy, right? That if you work hard and if you're really nice, you're going to make it in the world, right? And that's stuff that as we know, because of systemic barriers, doesn't always happen. But I think it's so interesting. Like we have such good terminology and such good language to describe these things, but the way this actually falls upon our kids, that they don't have the language to actually say what's actually happening to me is exceptionalism, or I'm confronted with the right to comfort. Like, our brown and black kids in independent schools go through so much just to survive and thrive. We have language for it, great, but when you're like 12 or 13 and you are faced with that white supremacy and white culture head on, like, how do you survive? How do you thrive?
And I think about the language. Sorry, go ahead, Danielle.
I was going to say that's so important, because all of the kids we recruit at Oliver are like at the top of their class in their communities. And, you know, we come in and we say we have this amazing opportunity that's supposed to be almost like a reward for your intellectual acumen, your work ethic. And then it doesn't feel like a reward. And then you don't know how to process it because you're special and you've been given this opportunity. And so how do you name that? And, you know, I talk to alumni who don't regret having attended independent schools, but certainly who feel like they didn't have the language, the support, the allies within those buildings. You know, some of our student activists have been calling out administrators to say, I'm not sure I trust you to hold space for me, because all of the staff of color who were here when I started high school in 9th grade don't work here anymore. That's like powerful stuff. So, you know, there's also some trauma that's happening at PWIs, and it doesn't necessarily end at the high school level, right? Because if you go off then to the next PWI for college, you're constantly having the same experience. And there is trauma there.
There's tons of trauma. And when I just thought about the comment of not having the words to use to name what's happening. I mean, I think my daughter's 15. She's got the words, but when she uses them, right, she is perceived as you are angry. You are the same thing that happens to professional Black people within the workplace, right, where we are punished for utilizing the terms that we know exist to call out this behavior and these actions. But this is why I love the Black Act movement, because it's like, you know what, you're not going to confine us. We are going to find a way to tell you that this is not okay. And it is so ingenious, because I thought to myself, why has this should have happened years ago, right? But now they have the tools, they have the voice, and they have the language to do so. Even in this anonymous format, they're still gathering this data to be able to say, look, you are not going to be able to continue to do this and thrive, because we are an integral part of who you are, so you must address this now. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Betty.
The Black Hat movement is amazing. It's amazing. I've been working with some schools as they think about responding to the Black Hat Insta pages. And what I'm surprised is that when I'm talking to heads, they're like, oh, I didn't know about this teacher. I didn't know about this teacher. I'm like, you really didn't know about that teacher? Because all you students did, right? And so what, and I remember asking a head this question, like, whose comfort are you actually securing? Whose comfort do you actually care about, right? Because the question is, should I fire this teacher? Should I not fire this teacher? And it's like, whose comfort are you protecting? And usually it's not our students.
And yeah, it's usually this person has been here for years, and they love, and they, meaning the other they, love him or her, and as we've never heard anything about this person doing these things. Well, perhaps not, or perhaps you have, right? I think about the wave that happened a few years ago, in which lots of allegations of sexual assault also had this wave where it's like, you sure enough did know. Absolutely. You just decided not to do anything about it because you figured it would go away. This isn't going away. And so it's time. Yeah.
So my next question is, so many nonprofits, so many independent schools, so many organizations have a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So there's like your commitment, right? We've allocated resources to this issue. Talk to me about why we don't see more progress happening as a result of these roles being created. I think Forbes also did a story that said, the turnover is tremendous in particularly in the corporate sector. And I would imagine other organizations are seeing something similar. So, okay, we hired our diversity, equity, and inclusion person. We did the Undoing Racism training over the weekend. Why are we still standing in the same place? It's like a race to the... Okay, Paula.
Having been in one of those roles, there's a lot of different reasons in which those roles may not be successful. Number one, they're like some hidden clandestine person that's behind the scenes and they're actually not centered. So you don't know that they exist. You don't know what they do if they exist. Number two, there's not any power given to the role to create and shift frameworks and to call out or call in when there's situations that happen. I think about lots of organizations that I work with, including schools, that will say, yes, we have had someone, and I talk about what are some of the benchmarks that have been hit? What are some of the things that have been accomplished? What are some of the frameworks that exist because of this role? Well, look at her picture. She's Black. That should be enough. Like literally, it's like, here's this person and we have them. And so that should be enough. And it's like window dressing anywhere else. That's great, but that size doesn't fit me. Right? Like let's talk about what is actually going to make a difference. And I really feel bad having been again in this role within a school framework. It is challenging because you have faculty who is powerful, you have administrators who are powerful, alumni. There's so many different factions who can be against the work that you're trying to do, which is shift culture, because they hold on to this culture like we hold on to white supremacy, right? Like where it's like, this is who we've always been. Well, if we don't sing that fight song that includes racist words, who will we be, right? If we don't utilize that name of that school, who will we be? Like, it is literally saying we have to shift foundational things that are part of who people have invested money, time, energy, and experience into. And so to be in a place where you're not fully supported by all of the different stakeholders that are powerful, it sets you up for failure. Right? It doesn't allow you to do the work that you're supposed to do. It is really challenging. And for the student piece of this, students should feel like that person or those persons are a resource, and they instead feel like they're maintaining the status quo. They're not allowing them to speak their truths or to shift their experiences. So really, what is the benefit of those roles?
Yes, yes, and yes. And I would add, if that role is usually held in one person when it needs to be an entire team, right? That can actually take that on. So it's a department, a unit, a fully staffed, like Chris is saying in the chat, like it's that those roles need the influence and authority to back them, right? And all of those things that Paula said. And sometimes we're brought in for an inciting incident, and we have to be real about like the colonial model of leadership that a lot of times are working under, which is about like, take care of those people who are making too much noise. And that's usually when a DEI person is hired or a staff member is hired to just make sure, can you keep the families quiet? Can you just address these 3 or 4 issues and not rock the boat, right? Because of this colonial mindset about like, really, it's like a plantation model, right? Like, let's keep those darkies like from making too much noise and not resisting. And let's keep, ultimately, we are not talking about rearranging power.
And sometimes when you're in this role and you push too hard, you then get fired. Right? Because they hired you to do the work that you're supposed to do, and then they ask you to leave. I'm talking from experience.
I'm right there with you. I'm like, with you.
You are probably effective.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think one thing about the role now, which is very different than when I was in the role previously, but one thing that's a problem with these roles, and you mentioned it, Paula, is the lack of power. Not only the lack of power, but the like, everything is wrong, fix it today, or by the end of the week. And I'm gonna give you no money and no staff, right? And so like, it's set up for failure. If there's no infrastructure to support the work, it actually supports white supremacy. It actually keeps it aligned.
And it sets up this kind of like, okay, I keep experiencing this. Are we done yet? Like you said, Danielle, we took the Undoing Racism and we sat through the unconscious bias training session. And my goodness, we added 2 books by Black authors. That should be enough, right? Like, it's like, not quite. And that being in that space of pushing and continuing to push, it literally is. You're not going to be, no one's going to want to sit with you at the lunch table because you are making, my therapist always says, I say this in every session I do essentially, is that growth begins where comfort ends. And DEI professionals are pushing discomfort, right? Because our normal, our baseline is rooted in white supremacy. So, yeah.
So with that said, what would an ideal setup or a structure look like? Like if you could just go into an organization, the board is ready, the head of school or the CEO of that nonprofit organization is like ready to put in the work. What would that look like? Because I think people are so jaded at this point, we can't even imagine what's possible. So let's say money is not an obstacle, resources aren't an obstacle. How would you reimagine DEI within the organizations?
Yeah. So if I think about a school community, like I want to go back to what Paula said earlier, right? It would start with like an assessment of all the policies, practices, procedures, hires, curriculum, how we're doing staffing, like what is the ground level? Where are we? And then let's set some long-term goals to actually get there. So one of the things I think about is how do you actually staff up a school and retain folks, folks of color who actually want to stay at these schools, because we're being pushed out as well. Marie Curtin, Kirton, has an incredible article that's on Medium right now. She was on the admissions team at the Hewitt School, and she's really breaking down what were some of the barriers and what would have been possible. So she does an incredible job talking about, if we approached enrollment differently, we could actually address some of these things, right? If we took a look internally about what is the makeup of the staff, is the curriculum actually something that is justice formed and healing centered? What would it be to actually build with families and not see families as adversaries? Like those families, actually name some of the power differentials between families who might be on scholarships and those who are fully funded. And then to me, there's also something about like, what is the relationship independent schools also have to public schools, public schooling, right? And so the way it's set up that often can pit students against their own family members. Is like there's an exceptional student within their family that then goes to the school, and then their siblings or their cousins are still in public schools, which are publicly fine. I'm both a product of public and independent schools. But like, so what I'm trying to point to is how do we have a more holistic way of looking at what's possible?
One thing that I've been using is this framework by Christine Ortiz, which is Equity Meets Design, which is an opportunity to really think about what is the problem that's happening in this community, and spending a lot of time on actually naming that problem, and then with community beginning to think about solutions. So that way it's not just one person, you're actually bringing in the folks who are most marginalized to actually be decision makers, then at the table to lead the work and to be supportive of the work.
Yeah, I'll just reframe it again. You can't, in my mind, you can't do the work unless you know the problem. And we can know the problem generally, but to know specifically when you're within your institution, what are the issues, to provide multiple ways to get information about what the experiences are of Black, people of color, Indigenous people within your organization, within your school, so that you can then act and create solutions based on what you know. So oftentimes people will say, because of an incident, well, we know we have to do X about this thing. And then there's a whole sort of blind spot about other experiences that are occurring that if you do an assessment properly, you gain full knowledge of what is happening with the organization within different stakeholder groups. So with the board, within the faculty, within the student body, within staff, and alumni, and then get like who are we then based on that knowledge? What is our culture? Where can we do better? And then to start to set different strategies, goals around shifting narratives and shifting policy and practice. So yeah.
So one of the things that I have noticed, right? Everybody who claims to be a DEI consultant or to be doing anti-racist work, I'm hearing folks talking about, my phone is ringing off the hook. I have all these opportunities to kind of do the work. But some of what I've heard is a little bit troubling. So, for example, I was part of a gathering of professionals. A POC consultant had been brought in to kind of talk about some of the issues that we're tackling in this conversation. But the conversation was framed around like the sensitivities of Black folks and how Black folks need to be less sensitive. And she went as far to say, like, sometimes it seems like Black folks are looking for injury when they engage with folks. And I'm looking around the room, and I'm one of very few people of color, and people are lighting up because it kind of like, I almost felt like they were off the hook, and I walked away really frustrated because I felt like we'd missed a real opportunity to begin to open up conversation. Because I think if there's anything we can do about what the future looks like, we can all be starting with all of our young people, not just young people of color, but also I think this is an important moment to reshape leadership across cultural experiences. So as organizations are being bombarded by folks who say that, you know, they're qualified to be doing this work, right? There's not, right? I'm not looking for like white organizational culture as in like you have a certificate, you know, from this specific institution that says, you know, you're qualified to do this work. But as a leader, how would I make those decisions? How do I know who's real? How do I know who's going to help me get to the heart of the matter so that my students have a very different experience?
You need to ask what their past impact has been. Right? The same thing you would do if you were going to buy, you know, insert any other thing here, is to find out how it has worked, what have been the benefits, what have been the challenges for working with that DEI consultant. The problem is anybody can get a certificate. like anybody can get a certificate, and you can say I'm certified in XYZ, but you may not have had experience doing the work. And what you really want to hear is how people have been able to interact, learn from, be challenged by, and those folks have been able to shift those cultures, and with tangible information, not just, you know, it was nicer after the person left. Because, you know, I often say, I don't think I'm the right consultant for you. I often say that because it is a partnership. When done properly, it's not me coming in and saying you have to do it. It's me saying, here's some recommendations. Let's think about when we want to do this. Will this work here? Why not? It is very much a relationship and a push and pull. And if you have not done that groundwork to say, is this the right person for our organization? And that doesn't mean through that lens of whiteness. That means that past impact, right? So how have you been able to help shift other cultures? What have been the check marks that you've gotten in terms of success? Then you're not doing I mean, it doesn't make sense now to spend money if you're not going to have checked into what past benefits and successes have been.
I think for me, there are a couple of things I check on. What's your pedagogy? What's your approach, right? And how do you incorporate liberation into your approach? I asked them, like, what is white supremacy? Like the same question you asked us. I asked them that. I'm wary about anybody who calls themselves an expert, right? Because we all have work to do. And so I sometimes ask, so what work are you ongoing now in terms of your own anti-racist journey? What are your growth areas? And how do you work for liberation outside of the training room and outside of your consultancy, right? To ensure that this person who's coming in has a holistic approach to this, that they're not just wanting a paycheck. Because this field is now growing and growing and growing, and there are many people in this field who can cause harm. And some of them have books.
Well, I had to throw somebody's book in the garbage. I'm sorry. My mother was a librarian, Ivy League trained librarian, but I was like, yeah, I'm not participating in this. I don't care what you wrote. So,
Amen.
But I don't know how to behave. So, you all have attended PWIs. What would you tell your younger self about how to navigate PWI institutions and maintain a sense of self and courage, and possibility in the face of?
Mm-hmm. This is getting, I feel my, my heart like welling up, thinking about being, as a student from the South Bronx. I'm a Black woman whose family has been in the United States for more than 270 years. I'm the 7th of 11 generations of like trafficked Africans. And so when I think of the weight, and I'm literally the first person in my family who's born outside of like the rural South. And so when I think of the weight that was on me as my folks migrated to New York City and found themselves in the South Bronx and in Harlem, trying to get away from the racial terrorism and the patriarchal violence that they were experiencing in the Deep South, and then to be met with it in New York City. And so I am just being flooded anytime I'm in these conversations with just my own memories of like how much was riding on me that was communicated through the ether. It was not like my family was pressuring me to like carry them through something, but I knew the stakes were high. And so what I would say to myself is tell your family what is going on. I experienced so much harm at the school on so many levels, from people, teachers thinking that I did not write my own papers because it was like, how do you actually have this kind of knowledge, political knowledge? It's like, well, if you knew the community I live in, it wouldn't be surprising that I could actually give you a breakdown on the Sandinista revolution, because the people who live in my neighborhood are from Mesoamerica. This is not like a textbook example, or just a lot of harm from other students and things that I kept quiet, and I just kind of put on my smile and just kept moving forward. But I was really hurting inside. And so what I would say to myself and to other students who are on these campuses, talk to your families, talk to adults or people in your community who can actually help you process some stuff. I also want to encourage families, like, what are the other healing supports that are available, right? We actually, anytime you're dealing in a predominantly white environment, we need some type of healing supports, whether that for folks is yoga, dance, or therapy, but like straight up the onslaught is real. And so how do we look at therapy and coaching and support? This was something that I would say to myself, like I had family support, but because I didn't share what was going on, they could not actually intervene until, things had gotten really out of hand. And so I would just advocate for folks, finding those folks that you can actually talk to. And then for faculty or students, and I've seen this happen, like I'm an alumna of Fieldston, and I know that there are Black folks on those campuses who are going above and beyond what their job description is to make sure there are like healthy places for young people to process. So I would also say seek those folks out. There are more that are there now than were there at any given point while I was there. So that's what I'm thinking about. And the last thing I would say is the school community cannot be our only source of like social development, because that is actually detrimental, right? And so a school community, we're going out with friends, we're doing all these kinds of things. One of the things that did help me is like I had other things going on besides what was going on campus, and I think that is important. So I would just remind myself or encourage other young folks who are in that same similar situation to not make the school your everything.
I would say find joy wherever you can. You are worthy, right? Because sometimes these schools make you feel like you're not. I went to St. Anne's and it was a train ride and a bus ride to a different world. I was a little Black, Puerto Rican, Dominican, queer boy trying to figure out who I was in the world. And I echo what Monica said in terms of remain connected to your community and to your peoples, because those are the peoples that will get you through.
I would also say to utilize the resources that exist for you at the schools. One of the challenges that I have had I've done a lot of work with, all across the pipeline, all the way through law school. And I'll call the general Black we, tend not to use resources. And sometimes it's because we don't understand that they are for us, right? And so I give an analogy of saying, like, look, whether you're paying for school or not, you're paying for it with time, effort, and energy.
Right.
And so you should be utilizing the resources that exist to be there for you. You know, 25 years ago when I was at Deerfield Academy, some of the most important work that I have done on myself was due to the resources at my school saying you are important, you are valued here. And so it is really why I'm saying connected to the brand, connected to the organization, because I care so much about the experience that I had there and want other students to have good experiences there, knowing that that's not the experience for everybody, and knowing that a lot of times the interaction among students is the most painful that folks are having, and it makes it a lot harder to process because of the social pieces of it, and not just the sort of the hierarchy that exists there. As I was mentioning before we started, the only time I've been called to my face, the N-word, was by another student when I was at school. And again, I'm from Brooklyn, so I was processing like, what did you just say? I'm coming at you. But not everybody really has that to be able to do so. And I was also able to go to a white woman who was, within the sort of healthcare space there to say, this happened to me. Right. So that was not just me being able to fight for myself, but also say, I need you to support and care for me now because this just happened to me. And what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing from all of these Black ads, it's I'm saying something and no one cares, or I don't feel safe to say something because that space has not been set for me. So when thinking about what administrators, faculty, et cetera, can do now is to say outwardly, loudly, and consistently, we are here as a resource for you. And then to be that resource, to be able to hear that, this is what is needed from different constituencies, right? Just because we all look the same color doesn't mean we all need the same thing. To ask individually, what is it that you need in order to be successful, to thrive, to be cared for here? Because particularly when you're thinking about the boarding school space, that's your home. And so if you don't feel comfortable at home, what does that mean for how you're able to succeed in all the pieces that you're supposed to be successful in within that space that is your home and your school?
Benny, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question because one thing that I continue to think about is if we know that independent schools aren't serving Black and brown children to the way that they should be serving Black and brown children, why are we continuing to support independent schools? Like that's like how do we grapple with that? Like I was thinking about my own daughter, and I'm not gonna send her to one because I don't want her to go through what I went through. And so that's just a question I continue to grapple with, even though, that's just something I'm sitting with.
I desperately wanted to send my child to Deerfield Academy. She desperately said to me that it's not going to be the school for me. And so I had to hear that, like I tell everybody, I loved going to school there, but she said, I'm not you. Right. So I had to hear that I am not the way in which, not like my parents, Caribbean, they were like, you're going to take every single thing that ever happens to you and it will be fine because you come from slaves. But like literally it was like that weight is random. It stays on my shoulders. Like I'm in therapy because of it. But anyway, the point is that she's like, I don't have that. And I don't need to have that as something that's put upon me within a space. So I choose to be in a place where I know I'm going to thrive. And then she did all the due diligence to find a space for herself that would be a place where she would thrive. And I had to hear that. And so I think the answer is not totally a clear one, right? I think some people are doing a darn good job and are able to thrive in these spaces, right? And then there are and then the spaces also need to be able to understand that they are not serving everyone in the way they need to.
Mm-hmm. I think it's such a wrong choice that our parents have to make. And I can say that now as a mom, right? And so like I had a very unique journey because I went to 11 schools between kindergarten and 12th grade. But my nursery school was a Black liberation nursery school, actually called the Liberation School. My first elementary school was Nairi Educational Institute, founded by some of the academic folks my mother encountered when she was a research librarian at Rutgers. And then when I was 9, my mother said, now my father's African American from DC, but my mother said, I want you to know what it's like to live in a country where Black people are the majority. So she packed up my 9-year-old self and sent me to a boarding school in St. John, Barbados. And so I feel like I've been to public school, I've been to Black nationalist school, I've been to private school, I even did a little bit at Catholic school, and Black parents have a very difficult choice to make. I didn't understand the uniqueness of my experience until a friend of mine from Swarthmore said, damn, but you were like so prepared for Swarthmore. And I said, really because of my mom, because no matter what was being read in school, I always had a home reading list. Okay. And those books had to be done, and those book reports had to happen regardless. But as a professional, I've worked in proximity with public schools. I've worked with charter schools. And I think there are not a lot of great examples of a nurturing, rigorous, challenging educational experience where our kids are not going to face some of these same issues. In 2010, 70% of all new teachers in the New York City public school system were white. And so I'm surrounded by all these Black and brown college educated folks. And I'm like, where are the Black and brown teachers in their classrooms? Where are the administrators? My daughter was 12 before she had her first Black teacher. And so I think all of these systems, when I was the lead applicant for the first charter school in New York State, that was supposed to be a community-led, community-driven movement to transform public education. And no shade, Benny. But, I think it's evolved into something that's very different, that doesn't feel like it belongs to us anymore. And I think that's accurate. So, so it's a, why should any parent in this amazing country have to, say, do I want my kid to not have a science book in 8th grade? I worked in a school in Brooklyn where there were no science materials at all. And I had a lot of promising students who just weren't going to have the level of access that I got at an independent school. Did I always feel seen? No. Did I benefit from being one of 7 students in my AP English class? Of course I did. So I think this is such an important conversation for me, because as I'm fundraising for Oliver, I get all the time, these are the kids who are going to be fine anyway. They don't need help. What are you talking about? Like, if you're a Black and brown child in this country, I have had lots of amazing students who did not make it to the finish line because they did not get the support that they needed and deserved. So that's like my little soapbox there.
Well, I so appreciate what you're saying, and you're making me think about the ways that a school community, independent school community, will flatten Blackness, right? And so what I also hear you naming is like, what are possibly some of the class dynamics, right, that create different opportunities for different students that that we don't get a chance to explore. So like you're saying, your mom is an Ivy League trained librarian, right? And she did an incredible job. And it does not mean that she's a better parent than someone who didn't have that education, that same educational experience. And that's not at all what you're saying, right? But sometimes we think that the school will approach it like, if you just kind of like you said, took advantage of the resources, you really don't want this. And there was a time in education throughout the United States where there are a number of schools where it is not, the parents don't have to actually work as hard. That's what I think I'm trying to say.
And my mother had to put in the work, right? Yeah. I mean, think about that. She had a full-time job, but she always understood that she could not rely on any system to make sure I got the education that I deserved. Even as she was fighting for her own survival as a Black woman professional in spaces where she wasn't always seen.
Exactly.
So,
and that's right, that our families don't have to, some families don't have to work as hard. And one of the things I would love to see shift in these school communities is this, and some of the programs that support are like, for an Oliver Scholars, like what other support systems can you be funded at scale so you can actually provide the support because you actually know the students best, right? You spend a lot of time, you develop intimate relationships. There are other programs like this. So what would it mean to scale up and resource like parallel programs that are helping our students to get into these schools, so that way you could be another source of support and reach back, but also you are working at low capacity, brilliant staffing and brilliant leadership, but just like the resources are not there. And then this notion that when I was coming up, and I hear this all the time, is like, well, you know, Black students, children of color, they need role models. And I remember my mom actually having to come to school and say, please quit telling my child that she needs role models. We have plenty of role models all over the place. What I'm actually
I know
asking,
your mama.
yeah, you do know my mama. Right? So please.
You recovered.
That's right. But what our children actually need to see, right? What Black children actually need to see is white adults in partnership and following the leadership of Black adults who are not providing services to them. So I'm going to say that again, right? Like, what is the orientation, right? Because students are seeing transactional relationships with grown people of color that are only there to provide service, or that's the thinking, that's the socialization, right? And so the role modeling is also for white families. What does it look like for adults to actually be in healthy, collaborative, in some cases, hierarchical relationships where people of color, Black folks are leading you and you're not just getting services from us?
Yeah, let's get some Black people on the boards of these schools. Let's get some Black people who are leading the faculty, right? Let's look at who we're bringing in as experts, right? I know we're not supposed to talk about expertise, but you know what I mean, right? Who to say that it's not just white expertise that we're centering. Right? Oftentimes I will go into sessions and I will say, when's the last time you saw a Black woman who was presented to you as an expert in any topic? And it'd be like, raise your hand, not all at once. Hurry up, right? Like,
but it's deeper than that. I would say, when is the last time that you as a white professional, or, you know, sorry for the professional word again, what as a white individual had to lean in and be subject to the expertise of a Black person? Like, I have worked in organizations where you have a white board that has never, not one person had ever had a Black supervisor who made decisions about their economic situation within those organizations, you know? So sometimes we're in these spaces, as someone said, like almost as window dressing. Can people actually stop holding up our resumes to say, look who we hired, and really lean into what we bring to the roles? There's a question here about internalized racial inferiority. You know, I think that I definitely saw some students of color, particularly Black and brown students of color, feel like if I make my identity invisible, you know, then I'll be safe. So, you know, we've had some events where we would just like ask a random kid, you know, do you want to weigh in on XYZ issue? And it's like, I don't really identify as Black. As I look at this Black little face, who else is positioned in the society to negate their entire cultural identity and experience in order to find some level of educational and psychological safety? You know, what's the role of an Oliver Scholars in helping to shore up and support our kids and also our parents, to give them back their voices, in some cases, and their power to be advocates for their kids? What could I be doing? What could my staff be doing? Not to be asking for free advice, but I know you have ideas.
I'm just taking a deep breath. No, go ahead. I'm just breathing. Go ahead.
Yeah. I wonder what mental health support you provide to families and to students. I wonder what healing looks like, right, for students, and what healing can be provided to parents, right?
And what spaces?
And what?
What spaces we're providing for that healing to happen?
Yeah.
Well, I would say, you know, for the first time in the organization's history, the chief program officer is Dr. Deidre Franklin, who's a counseling psychologist. So she's like always on it, always on it. We also now have 2 licensed counselors on the Scholar Services team who can offer some initial clinical assessments. And then I think just the fact that we have been, around this block a couple of times means that we are able to reach out to other individuals and organizations for additional resources when, we hit upon capacity in terms of what we can do internally to help families kind of navigate some of that. So, but it's all new. It's like a new new focus within the organization to say that, this is heavy. I struggle. I grapple with the frustration, the anger at constantly, having my contributions, just the aggregate, right? Not in this particular moment, be undervalued. And, how can I be seen in this sector?
And I think there's other support systems that need to be provided to first generation college or independent school students. I was hearing y'all talk about your families and your moms and their involvement. My mom was a Spanish speaker and didn't have access to go to St. Anne's and advocate for me. And so I had to do all the advocating for myself. And it wasn't that she cared for my well-being, obviously, but she didn't have the capacity to do so, right? And so what support systems do we provide to first generation folks to gain that access?
I'm frightened. I love what you're saying, Benny. I think it's so important because one of the things that scares me is like, if we actually can't take up this conversation in healthy ways that don't re-traumatize students around racism, then what happens for the students and the families in the intersections, right? Like, then if you can't handle race, then I'm actually not going to share anything about being queer. I'm not going to share anything about being a survivor of violence. I'm definitely not going to share anything about I'm in a gender exploration, right? So if we can't handle something as complex, but also as basic as racism, then it does not inspire students or families to actually come forward and share more of themselves. And so there's multiple complex layers of being traumatized it's happening.
And then our kids are having to navigate multiple identities in 2 different worlds, right? In their families of origin and their communities of origin, where ideas about gender fluidity may be headed in a different direction from where kids actually are, and then adding the layer of not just race but also classism. We haven't talked about that as much, but one of the students was saying there was a pest issue in his boarding school dorm. And so everyone started joking, oh, now they're turning XYZ boarding school into Section 8 housing. And he said, I live in public housing. And, I don't have pests in my apartment, but also so what do you think about people who live in public housing? And then what do you think about me? And then the silencing that happens. So there's no opportunity to kind of explore those issues around class any further. Because I know when I worked in Harlem, we asked the kids, if you see yourself as wealthy, stand on the left side of the room. If you see yourself as not wealthy, stand on the right. And a whole bunch of kids thought they were wealthy because they had sneakers and phones, right? So it's all relative, right? But also, I think the breadth of access, I think it can be really mind-blowing. And what people don't understand is all of the extras you get at independent school aren't necessarily free. So this idea that you can send the kids to independent school and they're going to be fine because they have all the resources they need. Sometimes there are fees attached to certain activities that are prohibitive for some of our families.
I also was just thinking about the sort of the stereotypes of, you're thinking about public housing, et cetera. And I'm reflecting on the fact that I am from East New York, Brooklyn, right? 75th precinct. I know my precinct, right? But I didn't see drugs until I went to boarding school. Right? So the perceptions around who does what and how it shows up for me was very much shifted, where people were like, look at all of these things. And I was like, what is that? And the assumption was that I had access and knew all of this. I'm like, we don't do that from where I'm from, right? Your perception is that we do that from where I'm from, but that's not what we do. And so all of these things kind of wrap into how we assess each other. I mean, gosh, we could talk about this for hours and hours. I'm just like experiences like, the first time somebody touched my hair, my mother was like, never let anybody touch your hair again. And I was like, why? Because Jen brushes everybody's hair. So she's gonna brush mine. She's like, Jen will not brush your hair. Right. But I just, it was about wanting to be a part of it, but not realizing that part of that was this sort of fetishizing of who, and again, thinking about how we can process ourselves and know what we know. It's why we have to have these resources, why we have to have outlets to be able to bounce things off of and understand what the ramifications of some of the interactions are. Because sometimes our parents aren't there. Like my parents dropped me off at school, came to visit me on one Parents' Day, and came back at graduation. That was it. They were like, "You got this. You from the Caribbean." Right? And so, right. But that's my point, is that if we are not, to answer your question about how Oliver can be in this space in a different way, it is to amplify and to be a megaphone for the needs of your students, right? To say, look, they might not be telling you, but here's what we're hearing. You need to know that this is the experience that they are having, because all these schools saying we didn't know is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So I think, as a pipeline organization to access these schools is to say, we need you to know that we are holding space for our students in this place. And here is the information that we have that you now need to act on in your individual capacity as the different schools.
And if you don't improve as a school, we're not going to recommend you to our families.
That's right, because the diversity is equally as important to the school, right? And so it has to be a reciprocal relationship.
I think one thing that we've become very cognizant of, it's like, listen, we're selling something and we're making a commitment and a promise as an organization. And we have to prioritize not just the academic opportunities, but also the emotional safety of our kids. So I'm excited to be at this organization. I'm excited for where I think the board is going to allow me to take these conversations. And I feel supported in this moment in terms of how we're pivoting as an organization to really rethink how we show up. And you guys know me, I'm 100% real. So if it's not real, it's not for me. So with that, can I just ask you to offer some final thoughts, words of advice? If you have a book, if you have an article at him, if you're available for consulting, please, shout yourself out, name that, because we want to be a resource, if nothing else. Monica, you want to go first?
Start first. So I do want to say I am inspired and heartened and energized by what I am experiencing from young folks all across this country and all across the globe. The clarity, the heart, the passion, the ideas is incredibly inspiring to me. And so I know that this challenge will be solved because of who young people are showing us who they are. And I know that, all revolutions and movements for liberation have been, intergenerational movements where young folks are really providing us with the energy that's needed and the vision for what the future is. So I just want to say that. So like for wherever students may find themselves and their families in this conversation, like we see you, we're inspired by you. I'm personally saying you can reach out to me. Some folks have. I'm making myself available. And then I'll say that I facilitate a racial equity and liberation process of which Benny is a collaborator and a partner. We share a lot of community and space together. So for families or schools or communities that are interested in actually having some real groundwork on what it means to take up anti-racism, I am available through monica.cdennis@gmail.com. And I'm excited that you're at Oliver, Danielle. Really, really excited.
Thank you. And we will be calling all of you because even in an organization led and full of people of color, right, there's still work to be done, right? So that we're not just anti-racist, but we're also anti-oppression. And we are supporting our community however people show up. So I just want to name that as well. Benny, do you want to give
Sure.
yourself a shout out?
I guess I'll start by saying that these times, especially as folks are in the front lines and fighting against white supremacy, everybody in the audience, we also get to take care of ourselves during these times, right? To ensure that we can fill our own cup so we can fill others. And so that's my call for all young people as we continue to be on the front lines. I wanted to, this book, The Guide for White Women Who Teach Black Boys. My pieces in here around how to teach around queerness. And so get it, it's good. I am also, I'm a trainer, facilitator. I do anti-racism work. Holla at me. I'm here.
How can we find you, Benny?
Oh, find me, bennyvasquez@gmail.com. Yeah, do that. And I'm just so, I love this today. Thank you so much for inviting me and for being in community with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Paula.
Final words are, we cannot be stagnant at this time. That if you are trying to shift narratives and to change your lens, it will not be easy, but we have to keep pushing for that next thing. We have to be that catalyst in the spaces where nothing is happening. We have to be the voice for the people who are voiceless, and we have to continue to do this work. It never stops. And to your point about how we're doing this work, I love this because I'm like, yes, teach me things, tell me things, right? Like we continue to learn from each other, and that is a beautiful space to be in. I love to see us in that space of expertise and be like, exactly what they just said. That's what we need to do more. And I'll just say that if you want to contact me, I'm probably the easiest person you can find on the internet. Paula Edgar in every space. So Instagram, LinkedIn, my own website, paulaedgar.com. I live on LinkedIn. It's my favorite place to be. And it's a great space for you to see some of the thought leadership of people who are doing this work even if you're not engaging them for the work, because we usually send and share information and resources, et cetera, in those platforms. And so I will say, even if you're not ready to start this work, connect with people who are doing it. And so, yeah, get at me.
Well, I just want to say that I have been admiring all three of you from near and from far. I feel like this was a conversation with family. This work is hard, but the community of folks that this work has brought me in proximity to just gives me all of the motivation. And, you know, I think that our kids are so worth it. I think that real change is going to start with them. They are leading this charge. So I'm really trying to catch up with the young people as CEO of Oliver Scholars. And I want us to be a partner with all of our partner schools. Listen, we've been doing this for 36 years. I want to be one of the people they call. You know, how do I approach this? Who are the consultants I should be talking to? How do we work through some of this? So that's a standing invitation to the community. And I'm just energized by the alumni who are coming back to engage, and the heart and soul of my staff. We could not do it without them. And I have to especially shout out Moshe Crone, who is the producer of all of our CEO Salon series. Moshe, you're amazing. We appreciate you. We appreciate all your magic. And we'll see you guys on YouTube and on the next episode. So thank you so much.